Why was no one looking at her? In a place where rank usually commands attention, where medals speak louder than words, she had become invisible. Master Chief Evelyn Thorne stood in the corner of the changing room, folding her uniform with the kind of precision that most people reserve for sacred things. Each crease, perfect. Each fold, exact. The concrete walls around her smelled of sweat and stale energy drinks, the kind of temporary space that gets forgotten as soon as you leave it. She was 48 years old. The lines around her eyes told stories she never shared. Stories carved by sun, by salt water, by pressure that would break most people. But to the three soldiers who just walked in, she was just another body taking up space. Another old face counting down to retirement. They didn't see her. Not really. Sergeant Rex Vance led the group. They called him Gator, not because he was fierce, because his smile was all teeth and no soul. Behind him, two specialists. Cody Miller, skinny as a fence post, went by Rook, and Leo Diaz, whose nickname Mouth was putting it gently. Young men, strong men, men who'd spent more time in simulators than in real combat, men who confused confidence with competence. Look what we got here, boys. Vance's voice bounced off the concrete, loud, theatrical, the kind of voice that needs an audience. He nudged Diaz, gesturing toward Thorne with his chin. Grandma's still playing dress-up. She didn't look up. Her hands continued their work, lacing her boots, left over right, pull, tighten, check. It was a ritual older than most of the equipment on this base, a ritual that had saved her life more times than she could count, because in her world a loose strap wasn't an inconvenience. It was a death sentence. Hey, I'm talking to you. Vance's tone shifted, the mockery giving way to something sharper, irritation. His shadow fell across her like a stain. What's the matter? Commands stick you on inventory duty again. Miller snickered behind him. She's probably why we're always out of Matrin. Old bones, you know. The words hung in the air. Casual cruelty dressed up as humor. The kind of comments that chip away at a person, day after day, until they start to believe them. But here's what they didn't understand. Evelyn Thorne had stopped caring about words a long time ago. Words were just noise, air shaped by tongues. What mattered was what came after words, the actions, the choices, the moments when people showed you who they really were. She finished her second boot and stood. Not quickly, not defensively, just stood. Her posture was immaculate, centered, solid. She wasn't tall, but there was something about the way she carried herself that made height irrelevant. She met Vance's gaze for the first time. Her eyes were gray, flat, calm, like the surface of water before a storm. They weren't afraid. They weren't angry. They were simply observing. You have a question, Sergeant. Her voice was low, steady. No inflection, no emotion, just a simple question hanging in the space between them. And that's when something shifted. Because Vance expected a reaction. He'd spent his entire career provoking responses from people. Fear, anger, tears. He was used to being the center of gravity in any room, the one who set the tone, the one who decided how things would go. But her calm, her complete absence of fear, it was like throwing a punch into empty air. Yeah, I got a question, he spat, stepping directly into her personal space. Miller and Diaz fanned out on either side, creating a loose semicircle, the classic intimidation formation. My question is, what's a useless relic like you doing taking up a slot someone useful could have? He leaned closer. This is an operator's unit, where the tip of the spear, you're just rust on the handle. For a fraction of a second, Thorne's gaze flickered, not to Vance, not to his friends, but up, to the corner of the room where a small security camera sat mounted near the ceiling, its red light blinking, silent, patient. Witnessing. Then her eyes returned to Vance. Your assessment is noted, she said, her voice still perfectly level. She made a slight move to sidestep him, to retrieve her pack and leave, because that's what you do when someone isn't worth your time. You leave. But Vance blocked her path. His feet planted, his chest puffed out, his entire body language screaming one message: I own this space. I own this moment. I own you. Noted, that's all you got. No fighting you at all. He shoved her shoulder. Hard, deliberate, meant to unbalance, meant to humiliate. But here's the thing about Master Chief Evelyn Thorne. She'd been hit by worse things than Sergeant Vance's hands. She'd been hit by waves that could swallow ships, by recoil from weapons that could tear apart buildings, by exhaustion so profound it felt like drowning on dry land. A shove. That was just data. She absorbed the impact without stumbling, her core solid as concrete pylons driven into bedrock. She didn't retaliate, didn't even brace, just took it. And that silence, that refusal to play his game, it shattered what was left of Vance's control. Useless, he snarled, his face contorting. And then he did something that crossed a line even Miller and Diaz hadn't expected. His hands shot forward, closing around her throat. A choke, intimate, dominating, designed to break her. The pressure was immediate. Constricting. For most people, hands around your throat trigger panic, primal fear, the body's desperate scramble for air, for escape, for survival. But Evelyn Thorne wasn't most people. Her mind didn't register fear. It registered angles, leverage, force vectors, the precise amount of pressure needed to solve this particular equation. Her left hand came up, not clawing, not desperate, just placed, cupping the back of his right elbow. Her right hand found the pressure point on his wrist, not a strike, a placement, a key fitting into a lock. Then she moved. A barely perceptible pivot of her hips, a slight turn of her shoulders. She redirected his forward momentum, used his own commitment against him, because Vance was strong, yes, but his strength was linear, all force, no finesse. He put everything into that choke and she simply redirected it. He found himself being pulled forward and down. His balance gone. His grip loosening as his body's own mechanics betrayed him. She stepped back, guiding his unbalanced frame past her. His momentum carried him straight into the locker behind where she'd been standing. The metal rang out, loud, final. 2 seconds. That's all it took. No flourish, no martial arts cry, just quiet, brutal efficiency, applied physics. The kind of movement that looks simple only because it's been practiced 10,000 times until it becomes instinct. Vance spun around, his face flushed, humiliation and fury battling for dominance in his expression. Diaz and Miller stood frozen, jaws slack, trying to process what they'd just seen, trying to reconcile the speed of it, the effortlessness. Thorne stood exactly where she'd been, her breathing unchanged. She adjusted the collar of her shirt, a small, precise motion. Then she picked up her pack, slung it over one shoulder and walked toward the exit. She didn't look back. Didn't say a word. The door hissed shut behind her, leaving the 3 men in stunned silence, the smell of their own bravado turning sour in the recycled air. But what happened next? What was she thinking as she walked those corridors alone? And more importantly, what had they just done? What does revenge look like when it's filed in triplicate? Evelyn Thorne walked through the corridors of the base with the same measured stride she always used. Not too fast, not too slow, just purposeful. People she passed noticed something was different. Maybe it was the way she held herself. Maybe it was something in her eyes, but most of them looked away quickly, instinct telling them not to ask questions. The adrenaline that should have been coursing through her veins was instead a cold, clear current of focus. Because here's what Vance and his friends didn't understand. Violence wasn't the problem. Violence was just a symptom. The problem was the system that allowed men like Vance to believe they could get away with it. That let them think quiet women were weak women. That mistakes strength for volume and competence for arrogance. Her quarters were small, Spartan, a single bunk, a metal desk, a chair, everything in its place. She set her pack on the floor, removed a ruggedized laptop, and sat down. Her first action wasn't to call a superior, wasn't to file a complaint. It was to open a secure log file. The cursor blinked on a blank page, waiting, patient. She began to type. 1642 Zulu. Entered changing facility B7. 1645 Zulu. Sergeant Vance R. Specialist Miller C. Specialist Diaz L. Entered facility. 1647 Zulu. Verbal confrontation initiated by Sergeant Vance. Subject, my perceived fitness for duty. 1649 Zulu. Physical contact initiated by Sergeant Vance. One shove, center mass. 1650 Zulu. Physical contact escalated. Sergeant Vance applied two-handed frontal choke. 1650 Zulu. Threat neutralized via minimal force joint control and off-balancing maneuver. Subject's momentum redirected into locker bank 12. 1651 Zulu. Exited facility. 5 lines. Clinical, stripped of emotion, just facts, times, actions, outcomes. She read it once, twice. It was accurate, it was sufficient. Next, she accessed the base's internal network. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with the same economy of motion she applied to everything else. No wasted movements, no hesitation. She navigated to the security infrastructure schematics and located the camera in changing room B7. Status online. Recording, continuous stream to central server. Good. The proof existed, timestamped, secure, irrefutable. She pulled up the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Article 128, Assault. Article 134, General Article, Disorders and neglects to the prejudice of good order and discipline. She highlighted relevant passages, saved them to a separate file. She was building something. Not revenge. A case. Because revenge is emotional, reactive, messy. What she was doing was different. She was documenting a system failure, identifying the fault, preparing the correction. Then she did something interesting. She waited. Not passively, not helplessly, but strategically. Because she understood something about men like Vance that most people didn't. Men like him couldn't let things go. Their egos were too fragile. Their need to dominate too consuming. He'd taken a hit to his pride in that changing room, and pride, when wounded, makes people stupid. She knew he'd escalate. She knew he'd try to rewrite the narrative. She knew he'd lie. And when he did, she'd be ready. The next morning came early, 5:30. The base was just beginning to wake up. Thorne was already dressed, already moving through her routine. Breakfast, coffee, the small rituals that keep soldiers sane in chaotic places. She was in the dining facility when she heard it. Voices urgent, angry. I'm telling you, she attacked him, came out of nowhere. Completely unprovoked, man. Rex was just trying to talk to her. Psycho, she's unstable. Miller and Diaz, sitting 2 tables over, loud enough to be heard, rewriting history in real time, turning victim into aggressor, turning assault into self-defense. Thorne took another sip of her coffee. Didn't react. Didn't turn around. Just listened. Because lies have a pattern, they grow more elaborate with each telling. Details get added, emotions get amplified, and eventually those lies get written down, get filed as official statements, get used as evidence. That's when they become actionable. By mid-morning, the story had spread through half the base. Master Chief Thorne had attacked Sergeant Vance. Unprovoked assault, erratic behavior, dangerous. The rumors grew teeth, grew wings. By afternoon, Vance himself filed a formal complaint. And that's when Evelyn Thorne made her move. She walked into Lieutenant Commander Calloway's office without an appointment. He looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face. He'd heard the rumors, heard Vance's complaint was being processed. "Master Chief," he said carefully, "I was going to call you in." "I have something for you, sir." She placed a data chip on his desk. "Security footage, changing room B7. Yesterday, 1642 to 1651 Zulu. Also included, my incident report filed at 1710 Zulu, before any complaints were made." Calloway picked up the chip, studying it, then studying her. "They filed statements saying you attacked Sergeant Vance unprovoked," he said slowly. "I know, sir. Those statements are sworn, official, part of the record." "Yes, sir. And you're saying they're false?" "I'm saying the video will speak for itself, sir." There was something in her tone, not defensive, not angry, just certain, the kind of certainty that comes from knowing you're standing on solid ground. Calloway inserted the chip into his computer. The screen filled with grainy footage. No sound at first, just images. Thorne folding her uniform, Vance and his crew entering, the body language, the aggression. Then he turned on the audio. Their voices filled his office. Mocking, cruel, the shove, the choke, and Thorne's response. Calm, controlled, minimal force. Calloway watched it twice, his jaw tightening with each replay. When he finally looked up, there was something different in his eyes. Not just respect, understanding, recognition that he was dealing with someone who operated on a completely different level. "Master Chief," he said quietly, "why didn't you come to me immediately?" "Because I needed them to lie first, sir." The simplicity of that answer hung in the air between them. She'd waited for them to commit, to file false statements, to make their dishonesty official, because assault was bad, but assault plus false official statements, that was career-ending. "I'll need to forward this to the captain," Calloway said. "Yes, sir. There will be a hearing, captain's mast." "I understand, sir." "They're going to be destroyed." Thorne's expression didn't change. "Correction is the goal, sir, not punishment." But both of them knew the truth. Sometimes correction looks exactly like punishment. What she'd done wasn't revenge, it was something colder, more precise, more permanent. She'd given Vance and his friends enough rope, and they'd hung themselves with it. Now the question was simple: when would they realize what she'd done? Have you ever watched someone's world collapse in real time? The hearing room was sparse, functional, a conference table, chairs, fluorescent lights that hummed like wasps. Captain Marcus Thorne sat at the head of the table. No relation to Evelyn, but the shared surname was one of those coincidences that made people nervous, made them wonder if there were strings being pulled behind curtains. There weren't. The captain was known for exactly one thing: brutal fairness. Master Chief Evelyn Thorne sat on one side of the table, back straight, hands resting calmly in her lap. Her face was a mask of professional neutrality. On the other side, Sergeant Vance, Specialist Miller, and Specialist Diaz sat hunched forward. Their previous arrogance had evaporated, replaced by something that looked like fear wearing a thin disguise of sullen defiance. They'd been summoned without full explanation. Just told to report. Told to bring their statements. Told this was serious. And now, sitting in this room with the captain and Lieutenant Commander Calloway, the gravity of their situation was beginning to dawn on them, beginning to suffocate them like water filling a sealed room. "This is a captain's mast," Captain Thorne began, his voice low and resonant. The kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to fill a space. "A non-judicial hearing to address a matter of serious misconduct. The proceedings will be formal, to the point." He nodded to Calloway. "Commander, present the findings." Calloway stood. His movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial. He picked up a folder, opened it. The rustle of paper was the only sound. "Sir, on the date in question, this office received a formal complaint, filed by Sergeant Vance, Specialist Miller, and Specialist Diaz." He paused, Let the words settle. The complaint alleged unprovoked assault and erratic behavior on the part of Master Chief Thorne. Vance shifted in his seat, a small movement but visible. The complaint was found to be materially false. The words hit like a hammer. Vance's face went white. Miller seemed to physically shrink. Diaz stared at the floor as if trying to disappear into it. Calloway activated the large screen on the wall. The room filled with grainy footage. Changing room B7. The timestamp running in the corner. 1642 Zulu. There was no sound at first. Just images. Thorne alone, folding her uniform with precise, careful movements. Then three figures entering the frame. Vance, Miller, Diaz, their body language aggressive from the first second. Vance gesturing, clearly talking, clearly mocking. Thorne not reacting, not looking up, just continuing her task. Then Vance stepping closer, blocking her path, the shove, center mass, deliberate, hard. Thorne absorbing it without stumbling. Then the choke. Vance's hands closing around her throat, his face contorted with rage, and Thorne's response, impossibly calm, impossibly fast, the redirection, Vance hitting the locker, the sound of metal on metal somehow loud even without audio. The video evidence is conclusive, Calloway stated, his voice flat, clinical. It shows Sergeant Vance committing an unprovoked and aggravated assault. It shows specialists Miller and Diaz failing to intervene. It proves that their subsequent sworn statements were a deliberate fabrication, intended to mislead this command, to pervert the course of justice. He pressed another button. The audio came on. And suddenly the room was filled with their voices, young, cocky, cruel. "Look what we got here, boys. Grandma's still playing dress-up. She's probably why we're always out of Matrin. Old bones, you know. What's a useless relic like you doing taking up a slot someone useful could have?" Each word another nail, another piece of evidence. The contrast between their loud aggression and Thorne's quiet composure was devastating, made them look exactly like what they were. Bullies, cowards, liars. Captain Thorne let the audio play all the way through. Let them hear their own voices, their own cruelty. When it finally ended, the silence that followed was somehow louder than any of the words had been. He looked at the three soldiers. His gaze was like a physical weight, pressing down on them, making it hard to breathe. "Sergeant Vance," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "do you have anything to say in your defense?" Vance opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked from the screen to the captain, his eyes wide, panicked. The entire foundation of his reality had been pulled out from under him. He'd been so sure of his own power, so certain of her weakness. It was a misunderstanding, sir," he finally stammered. "A misunderstanding." The captain repeated the word slowly, savoring it. "You misunderstand the difference between your hands and a Master Chief's throat. You misunderstand the difference between a sworn statement and a lie." Vance had no answer. Captain Thorne turned his attention to Master Chief Evelyn Thorne. "Master Chief, your report, filed 1 hour after the incident, contained 5 lines of fact and no accusation. Why?" Everyone in the room turned to look at her, waiting for anger, for vindication, for some human reaction to being assaulted and then slandered. But Evelyn Thorne just met the captain's gaze directly. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Correction is the goal, sir, not punishment. I documented a system failure. The system is now correcting it." Her answer landed with more force than any angry outburst could have. Because she wasn't reframing herself as a victim. She was reframing the entire event. She was a diagnostician, an engineer. She'd identified a fault in the machine, and now the machine was repairing itself. The personal element, the assault, the fear, the humiliation they'd tried to inflict, none of it mattered to her. She was simply doing her job. Captain Thorne nodded slowly. a flicker of something that might have been profound respect crossing his face. He picked up a tablet, scrolled through something, then looked back at Vance, Miller, and Diaz. I have also reviewed your performance in the dive tank yesterday, Master Chief. And in light of that, I took the liberty of unsealing your true service record. The room seemed to still, because something was coming. Everyone could feel it. The final piece clicking into place. "The woman you called a useless relic," the captain said, his voice quiet but carrying the force of a hammer blow, "is Command Master Chief Evelyn Thorne, retired, 20 years of active duty in Naval Special Warfare Development Group." The silence was absolute. SEAL Team 6. The words hung unspoken in the air, but everyone knew what Naval Special Warfare Development Group meant. The most elite, the most capable, the ghosts who did the missions that never appeared in newspapers. She was reactivated under a Title 10 special directive to serve as a technical advisor for our new C4I integration program, the captain continued. Her file lists over 200 successful direct action missions. 200. Let that number sink in. 200 times she'd gone into harm's way. 200 times she'd faced death and walked out the other side. While Vance and his friends were playing video games in high school, she was taking down high-value targets in places whose names they'd never be cleared to know. "The reason she is quiet," the captain said, "is because she has nothing to prove. The reason she is calm is because compared to what she has seen and done, you are nothing more than loud, undisciplined children." Vance looked as if he'd been physically struck. He had assaulted a living legend. He had tried to choke a ghost. The captain's voice became hard, formal, the kind of tone that ends careers. "Sergeant Vance, you are found guilty of assault, of making a false official statement, and of conduct unbecoming. You are hereby reduced in rank to private. You will be removed from this unit and transferred to a disciplinary battalion pending further action." Each word was a death sentence, to his career, to his future, to everything he'd thought he was building. "Specialists Miller and Diaz, you are found guilty of failure to act and of making a false official statement. You are both reduced in rank to private first class. You will receive 60 days of extra duty and restriction." He paused, let it sink in. This command has zero tolerance for predators in its ranks. Dismissed. The three men stumbled out of the room, their ranks stripped, their pride destroyed, their careers in ruins. The correction had been swift, brutal just. And Master Chief Evelyn Thorne. She sat perfectly still, her expression unchanged, because this wasn't victory, it wasn't vindication. It was simply the system working the way it was supposed to. The fault had been identified, the correction had been applied. The machine was working again. But what happens after justice? When the dust settles and everyone knows what happened? What does respect look like when it's built on fear? Can silence be louder than applause? The public correction came the next day. The entire unit was called to formation on the main parade ground. The sun was hot, the air still, hundreds of soldiers standing in perfect rows, waiting, wondering. Captain Thorne stood before them. Master Chief Evelyn Thorne stood at ease a few paces behind him, her hands clasped behind her back, her face neutral, professional. But there was something different about her now, something the soldiers could sense even if they couldn't name it. She'd become visible. "I will not mince words," the captain said, his voice carrying across the silent ranks. "An incident occurred 2 days ago. An investigation was conducted. A hearing was held. The results are final." He paused, let the weight of those words settle. "I will not name the individuals involved. They have been dealt with. They are no longer part of this unit. What I will tell you is this." He took a step forward. A senior non-commissioned officer was assaulted by junior enlisted personnel. That officer defended herself using minimal force. Those personnel then filed false official statements attempting to frame her for the assault they committed. You could have heard a pin drop. "Let me be clear," the captain continued. "This unit is a family, but in every family standards must be enforced. We do not prey on our own. We do not mistake quiet competence for weakness. We do not tolerate bullies, and we do not tolerate liars." He let that sink in. The standard is excellence. The standard is honor. Anyone who cannot meet that standard will be removed. Then he did something unexpected. He turned, gestured toward Master Chief Thorne. "Look at Master Chief Thorne. She represents the silent professional, the ideal that every single one of you should aspire to. Learn from her example." It was an unequivocal public vindication. More than that, it was an elevation. When the formation was dismissed, Evelyn Thorne walked back toward the operations building, and something remarkable happened. Soldiers stepped aside, gave her space, offered quick, respectful nods. Some of the older NCOs actually came to attention as she passed. Not out of fear, out of awe, because they finally understood what they were looking at. A legend walking among them, someone who'd done things they couldn't imagine, someone who'd survived tests they'd never face, and she'd done it all without saying a word, without demanding recognition, without needing their approval. That afternoon, in the hushed quiet of the base's small workshop, Master Gunnery Sergeant Torres approached her. He was older, grayer, a diver from a different era, someone who understood the old codes, the old ways. He said nothing at first, just held out his hand. In his palm was a small, newly minted unit patch, black circle. In the center, a silver phoenix, its wings shaped like antennas rising from a bed of static. It was the same emblem from her footlocker, the insignia of her old unit, but clean, new, restored. Thorne looked at the patch, then at Tor's eyes. She took it, gave a slight formal nod. It was an apology, an acknowledgement, an offer of profound respect, all conducted without a single word, a silent ritual, a passing of honor from one old warrior to another. In the days that followed, the atmosphere on the base changed. Not dramatically, not overtly, but in small ways, the kind of ways that matter. Soldiers who'd once smirked at her now averted their gazes, or offered respectful nods. They gave her wide berth, not because they were afraid of her, because they were humbled by her. They'd been in the presence of something they didn't understand, something greater than themselves, and they'd been judged by it, found wanting, given a lesson they'd never forget. The quietest person on the base had become its new center of gravity. But respect earned through revelation comes with its own burden, because now everyone was watching, everyone was measuring themselves against her, and Evelyn Thorne. She felt the weight of those eyes. She'd spent 20 years in the shadows, anonymous, unknown. That's how she'd liked it, that's how she'd operated. But now the shadows were gone, the anonymity stripped away. She was visible. And visibility, she'd learned long ago, was its own kind of vulnerability. Late that night, alone in her quarters, she opened her personal log, the same file where she'd recorded the incident. She scrolled to the bottom, added one more entry. Correction achieved, system functional, personal cost acceptable. She stared at those words for a long time. Personal cost acceptable. That's what she told herself, what she'd been telling herself for 20 years, that the isolation was acceptable, the distance was acceptable, the weight of being a ghost who occasionally became flesh, it was all acceptable. But was it? She closed the laptop, lay on her bunk, stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow there would be another briefing, another mission, another problem to solve. The work never stopped. The machine always needed tending. And Master Chief Evelyn Thorne. She was the tender, the guardian, the silent professional who kept the machine running, even when the machine had failed her. even when the system she defended had needed her to defend it from itself. She closed her eyes, let exhaustion take her, and in her dreams she was back in the water, cold, dark, weightless, where the only sound was her own breathing, the only pressure was the ocean above her, where she could be invisible again. What do you do when the work isn't finished? 1 week later, the crisis had passed, the noise had faded, the base had returned to its rhythm. Operations, training, briefings, the machine humming along. Master Chief Evelyn Thorne stood in the operations center. The room was dim, lit by the glow of monitors and holographic displays. A large tactical map filled the center of the space, showing their area of operations, signal patterns, communication nodes, the complex web of information that kept them connected, kept them alive. She was focused on a new problem. Eastern border, signal interference, patterns that didn't make sense, could be equipment failure, could be atmospheric, could be something else, something intentional. Her fingers moved across the control panel, isolating frequencies, running diagnostics, the kind of work that most people found tedious, but for her it was meditation. Problems had solutions, systems had logic. If something was broken, you found the break, you fixed it. Simple, clean, unlike people. The transfer orders went through this morning. Lieutenant Commander Calloway's voice. She didn't turn around, didn't need to. She knew his footsteps, his presence, the way he moved through a room. The paperwork is closed, he continued, stopping beside her. He looked at the tactical display, at the interference patterns she was analyzing. There's someone else's problem now. Thorne gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Vance Miller Diaz private now, transferred, gone. The system had processed them, corrected them, moved on. The way systems do. You saved their careers, you know, Calloway said quietly. What you did in that changing room, using minimal force, documenting everything. If you'd hurt Vance, really hurt him, even in self-defense, it would have been complicated, messy, your word against theirs. Systems work best when properly documented, Thorne said, her eyes still on the screen. Calloway smiled slightly. Is that what you were thinking, when his hands were around your throat, proper documentation? For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, I was thinking that pressure on the carotid artery causes unconsciousness in 7 to 10 seconds, that I had a maximum of 3 seconds to respond before cognitive impairment began, that the camera angle was optimal, that witnesses were present, that the structural integrity of the locker behind me could withstand impact without causing serious injury. She paused. And I was thinking that I wanted to go home someday, to be able to look at myself without shame, to know that I'd done what was right, not what was satisfying. Calloway was quiet for a moment. Most people would have just hit him, he said. Most people haven't spent 20 years learning that violence is easy, that restraint is the hard part, that the real strength is in knowing when not to use force. She finally turned to look at him, her gray eyes calm, steady. They were loud, angry, certain of themselves, but they were just kids, Commander, kids who'd never been tested, never been broken, never learned what real strength looks like. And now they'll either learn or they won't. That's not my concern anymore. The system will sort them. Calloway nodded. He understood. In this world, you didn't always get to see the end of the story. You didn't get closure. You just did your part and trusted that the machine would keep running. The captain wants you to know, he said, that your advisory role is permanent, as long as you want it. The integration program needs someone with your expertise, your perspective. Thorne considered that, permanent. The word felt strange, heavy. She'd spent so long being temporary, transient, a ghost passing through spaces, never staying, never putting down roots. I'll stay, she said, until the work is finished. And when will that be? She looked back at the tactical display, at the interference patterns, the mysteries that needed solving. I'll let you know. It wasn't an evasion, it was the truth. She'd know when the work was finished. The same way she'd known when to move in that changing room, when to document, when to wait, when to act. It was instinct built on experience, wisdom earned in dark places. Calloway left her to her work, and Evelyn Thorne returned to the problem. The interference, the signals, the patterns, finding order in chaos, making sense of noise. It's what she'd always done. It's what she'd always be doing. The weeks that followed brought a subtle shift. The base had always been professional, disciplined, but now there was something else. A quiet acknowledgement, a respect that didn't need to be spoken. Young soldiers would see her in the dining facility, eating alone, reading reports, and they'd whisper to each other, "That's her, that's the SEAL, not SEAL, the SEAL," as if she were the only one, the platonic ideal of what they aspired to be. Some of them wanted to approach her, to ask questions, to hear stories, but something in her demeanor stopped them. Not coldness, not hostility, just distance. A professional boundary that said, "I'm here to work, not to be a mentor or a legend or an inspiration. I'm here to do my job." But occasionally she'd catch younger female soldiers watching her, their eyes holding a different kind of question. Not "how did you do it?" but "can I do it too?" And for them she'd pause, give a small nod, a moment of acknowledgement that said, "Yes, you can, if you want it badly enough, if you're willing to pay the price." One afternoon a young specialist approached her, fresh out of training, nervous, determined. "Master Chief, ma'am, I wanted to say thank you." Thorne looked up from her tablet. "For what, specialist?" For being here, for showing us that we belong, that we can be strong without being loud, that we can," she struggled for words, "that we can be us and still be excellent." Thorne studied her for a moment, saw herself 25 years ago, hungry, uncertain, desperate to prove herself in a world that didn't quite believe in her yet. "You already belong," Thorne said quietly. "You just have to decide if you're going to let anyone convince you otherwise." The specialist nodded, eyes bright, grateful. She started to leave, then turned back. "Did they ever try to stop you, when you were starting out?" Thorne smiled, just a small curve of her lips, sad, knowing. "Every day," she said. "They're still trying, but here's what I learned. The people who matter, they judge you by what you do, not by what they think you can't do. Focus on the work. The rest is just noise." The specialist saluted. Thorne returned it. And as the young woman walked away, Thorne felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hoping. Not for herself, for the next generation, for the ones coming up behind her, the ones who'd have it slightly easier because she'd walked this path first, who'd stand slightly taller because she'd refused to bend. That night she opened her personal log again, scrolled past all the technical entries, the incident reports, the mission data, to a section she rarely accessed, personal reflections, the human part of the record. She typed, "We don't always choose the battles we fight. Sometimes the battles choose us. Sometimes we're just trying to change our clothes in peace, and the world decides it's time to test us again. But here's what I've learned. Dignity doesn't require an audience. Strength doesn't need witnesses. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to become what they expect you to be." They wanted me to be weak, to be afraid, to confirm their assumptions. I chose instead to be still, to be calm, to let the system work, not because I couldn't fight, but because I didn't need to. That's the difference between power and force. Force is what you do to others. Power is what you become within yourself. I am still learning this lesson. After 20 years, after 200 missions, after countless moments of testing, I am still learning that the hardest battles are the ones we fight against ourselves, against our anger, our pride, our need to be seen, to be validated, to be understood. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And in the silence that follows, The world begins to listen. She saved the entry, closed the laptop. Tomorrow there would be another briefing, another problem, another test. But tonight, Master Chief Evelyn Thorne allowed herself to simply be. A woman, a warrior, a ghost becoming flesh. Still serving, still silent, still standing. Not because she had to prove anything, but because the work was not yet finished. And she'd never been one to leave a job incomplete. In the dim glow of her quarters, with the base settling into night around her, she understood something fundamental, something true. The changing room hadn't been about Vance. It hadn't been about revenge or justice or even respect. It had been about something simpler, something more profound. It had been about refusing to let the world make her smaller, refusing to let cruelty define her, refusing to let loudness drown out the quiet certainty of her own worth. She'd spent 20 years learning to be invisible, to move through shadows, to operate without recognition or reward, and in that changing room she'd learned something new. Sometimes the most radical act is simply being seen, as you are, without apology, without explanation, without the need to justify your existence to people who will never understand it. She'd become visible not by choice, but by necessity. And in that visibility, she'd shown them all something they desperately needed to see. That strength doesn't shout. That courage doesn't pose. That excellence doesn't need to explain itself. It simply is. The base slept around her, the machine humming, the system working, the corrections made, the faults identified and repaired. And Master Chief Evelyn Thorne. She closed her eyes, let sleep come, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. Because the work was never finished. The machine always needed tending. The system always needed guardians. And she'd be there. Silent, steady, unbreakable. A ghost who'd learned to be seen, without losing herself in the visibility. A warrior who'd found strength in stillness. A woman who'd shown them all that sometimes the loudest message is delivered in perfect silence.